Light, a show that explores Earth and sky and the spirits that reside there through art, literature, magic, culture, and creative action. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Okay, I am Chris Rapucci.
And I'm Elodie Saint-Onge.
And we are back to talk about the upcoming cycle of the moon from the first to the last lunar mansion, which we call the 28 shapes, in accord with the language from the list of 28 shapes from the Greek Magical Papyri from the prayer to Mene. And this time, and this goes in that list from ox to key. And this time around, it's going to span from June 3rd, 2021 to June 30th, 2021. And so what we've been doing, if you haven't heard the past couple episodes, is looking ahead to seeing what the lunations are going to be and what other prominent aspects occur, and delineating kind of cross tradition of lunar zodiacs to see what kind of shapes and archetypes and stories emerge. And just kind of a reminder, we talk about the lunar zodiac, and we mean that as far as these traditions of the lunar mansions and the lunar shapes and the nakshatras and all of this information and what comes from the grimoire tradition, and how that might be a separate but interrelated zodiac with the solar tropical zodiac of the 12 signs that everybody knows. And so when we're talking about these shapes and archetypes, etc., where they end up showing up is not always in the circumstances and life events as much as we see with the objective solar tropical, kind of like, what happens in Libra and what happens with the 7 traditional planets and the 3 outer planets might be describes kind of the themes and what happens in your life and what takes place and the shapes around you in your story. Whereas what emerges and is prominent in the lunar zodiac is a different kind of thematics, which is deeper in more subjective meaning and dreams and imagination, and might come out in creativity. So, the occurrences there might be more related to what you find in your sketchbook or your notebook or what you're dreaming about, what filters in, like you could have circumstances in your life going on where you're having a lot of car trouble for a month, but that's not necessarily what you're writing poems about. And so we're going to have an eclipse on June 10th, an eclipse in tropical Gemini, which is going to fall in the shape of dog. And so in 2002, there was an eclipse in the same mansion on June 10th of 2002. So we can kind of look back then too and see what was transpiring, what might have been happening in your magical life with spirit engagement, phenomenological occurrences, imagination, art, dreams, etc. And so if you have old sketchbooks or notebooks, it might be worth going back and looking at them and seeing if there's significant parallels, or you might just remember and then form some kind of like anecdotal connection. But with looking at the sun and the moon, there's a bit of a soul lunar seasonal component, like a perennial cycle. So we'll see things, there'll always be eclipses or lunations at this time of year in this part of the zodiac, whether it's lunar or solar, as just because of the cycle of the sun and how the moon rings around it, weaves with it. But then other than that perennial or seasonal cycle, there's also certain things we can look back to, like June 10th, 2002, because in that case, we're looking at the nodal cycle itself.
So that was that eclipse was in dog place too?
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay. And just to specify, two dog places between 17 degrees of Gemini and 0 Cancer. Just for reference. So if you have placement there, might be a little bit more significant. Did you want to talk a little bit about that place or what we found outside of the eclipse, like just what dog relates with?
Yeah, totally. Well, in the Pikatrix, we'll just kind of jump into the Arabic medieval conception of the mansions. It's called Aldira, the forearm, and there's some interesting cross correspondence there, because this is Gemini, so there's it's Mercurial, and the Pikatrix talks about increasing merchandise. It's a good time to increase merchandise and things like that. The talisman talks about writing the name of the corresponding angel of that mansion upon your breast, which is really interesting because of the stars contained within it, which we'll get back to and talk more about. But there's Capella, which was the horn from the goat nurse that nursed baby Zeus in the cave when he was hiding out from Kronos, the goat Almathea. And then Zeus later wears her face on his aegis, like on his sash, in the war against the Titans, which is really interesting also because Athena also does this, but with the Gorgon's face. So this kind of like apotropaic kind of quality. But then the Pikatrix sort of says like you should have the name of this being upon your breast, and so there's maybe some parallel there with the stories of stars and parts of the sky that might be collected there. But the Pikatrix also talks about dispelling flies, and this is the mansion after Crab, which we spoke about last time, and the associations with like flies and Beelzebub, like translating like Lord of the Flies. Getting into like kind of how we've seen dog in the automatic art and automatic writing that we do. The Pikatrix also says sweet smelling things are used in the talisman. And every time I go and paint dog, it ends up being like an abundance of plants and flowers and bones and little objects for a dog to be smelling on the ground. But I always end up with like flowers nearby. Like the last thing the dog maybe sniffed was some big flower, which is interesting, like dispelling pestilence and then bringing in sweet smelling things. And then of course, dogs being famous for their sense of smell.
Yeah, I get the flower too. And I get trails, but often the dog's smelling and flowers too, which could just be like kind of symbolic again, just to like emphasize the scent, like,
yeah,
which is like what's used to be to guide them. But in terms of like the parallel between like Mercury and dogs, there's something about movement here that I was thinking about. Like a lot of time I get can you say that in English? Like errant dogs, like they're not like house dogs.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, they're kind of like stray dogs, like
or just like living on the streets, finding their food.
Yeah.
Which you need to be clever to do. So there's like it's probably one of the place where it is really mercurial, which we usually don't do this. We look at the animal associated with the place, which often is very different than the solar placement. But here we have this like real mercurial motion quality, and the dog also is not like, it's not a domesticated dog, it's a dog in motion. It's a skinny dog. It doesn't get too many treats, so it's like using trails and scents to guide itself and get information and hide bones and whatever else.
Move things around, like and like it's sent in the sense of like all the details, like lots of little like, oh, what about this? What about this? So it does, I find that this place does seem to overlap a lot with Gemini, where, you know, sometimes you'll find the animal from the PGM or the material from the other Lunar Mansion information be kind of disparate a bit. Like it's like, yeah, it's kind of like Cancer, but it's kind of very different, where or whatever tropical sign. But here it's like, yeah, there's a lot of details. There's dogs. Dogs are, you know, related with Mercury, and like and then there's even, and then a lot of movement, you know, because Capella, the main star in the constellation you find here, is Auriga, which is the Charioteer, you know. And then even the amount of stories, like Gemini is a really chatty place. And if you look at how all different cultures looked at this particular asterism, there's like, oh, well, it relates to Bellerophon and that chariot story, and it relates to like goats. And
there was like,
yeah,
there's a lot of, like the Charioteer, the constellation of Orga that's here, whereas like the eclipse is going to be the closest. There was like, I was reading information and I just went down a rabbit hole for like 2 hours, which is
totally
really symbolic of the actual place. The other thing I wanted to say too, when we talk about the lunar places, or when we talk about the lunar zodiac, one of the ways that you can inform yourself with this is by even just paying attention to dogs. You know, this eclipse happened in dog place on June 10th, so like it could come through in that form too, just like crossing a dog. It could be as simple as that. You know, a lot of this symbolic of the Lunar Mansion will come through synchronicity or dreams or things like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then but yeah, it's a really, there's as far as like we were saying, how you went down like a rabbit hole, like a dog goes down a rabbit hole, you know, like,
yeah, I was like sniffing for one information, and then I went through, and it always, every time I talk about dogs and errant dog or roaming dogs, I think about the book called The Secret Life of Dog, which is like a woman who followed, I think that's what it's called, but it's a woman who followed different dogs for over like 10 or 15 years just to see what they actually want. And really, she discovered that they really are just looking for other dogs.
yeah.
That's really their prime motivation, but also that they covered a lot of territory, like spectacular amount of territory in looking for other dogs, following like scent and trails and stuff like that. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, and
so,
but I was gonna say like all the different stories, because some asterisms like across cultures and across time will be like, yep, that's always a lion. Everyone saw it that way. But
yeah.
like this area is like, it's goats, it's dogs, it's a charioteer, it's like it's an arm, it's like a sword, you know, like
yeah, it's true. And some information interesting that I came through with the constellation of Orga, the Charioteer, which is actually at it starts at 16 Gemini to 29 Gemini. But anyways, in one of the book on fixed stars, it's associated when it's with eclipses. Oh yeah, it's fixed stars and judicial astrology from George Noonan. He writes, Orga is one of the most fortunate constellations in the sky, but may still portend to earthquakes if situated, unfortunately, as regard to a solar eclipse, which is exactly what's happening now. I don't come across that kind of information all the time. I went down a rabbit hole trying to find more info on this.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, because it's like 4 days before the Uranus-Saturn square.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, exactly. And also, I guess, you know, somebody making a statement like this in a book is probably, you know, because we could look back, I guess, 2002, because there was a solar eclipse there.
Yeah, and then I thought of like a Waylon Jennings line when you said rabbit hole, like, and I think it's in Way More Blues. He says it's like, it's just like this, you know, because Mercury and the dog and the psychopomp, it goes like, She's like, if you want to get to heaven, you got to DIE. You got to put on your coat and DIE. If you want to get the rabbit out the LOG, you got to make a cold motion like a DOG. But it's just that's not based on nothing. That's some like country wisdom. If you want to get that rabbit out the log, you got to make like a dog.
Also, I was kind of thinking about Rahu on its own, the North Node, because eclipses happen when there's a lunation that happens close to the nodes. For those of you who don't know this, so this solar eclipse coming up on June 10th is a new moon, but it's a new moon that's eclipse, and that's the shadow of the moon, projected on the sun, basically. And it's an annular eclipse, so there's going to be a ring of fire. So a dark void with a ring of fire around. And I want to think a little bit about Rahu, just because Rahu tends to like emphasize things. There's sometimes in Vedic astrology, especially, it's associated with like madness, a little like, because it's just the head. So, if we're talking about a mercurial placement and then the sun and the moon close to Rahu, there's like this excess mental energy already found with Rahu. And now with this mercurial placement, I wonder if it's just like going to be like, well, we can see it. It's already really present just with the North Node in Gemini. It's just like there's so much information circulating. Keep all your options open.
Yeah.
Don't draw any conclusion.
Yeah, alternatives and options. I was thinking it's almost a good time to do some divination, but then wait until later on, when Mercury is out of shadow, to like look at the information from the divination.
Oh yeah, that's kind of cool.
But there was what was I just thinking about? I was thinking about, because it's a North Node eclipse, and this is like the head of the dragon, and it's increased. But like you said, in Indian astrology, it's Rahu, who's like, traditionally, the older depictions of Rahu are just a head, like just like a kind of like agitated, insatiable head. And then, and it's like a demon head, and then I think it's the medieval Arabic stuff about Gemini being the exaltation of Rahu, and the proximity of Rahu, of Gemini to, even though it's in Taurus now, the proximity of Gemini to Algol being like the Gorgon's head. And I've been thinking about that for like a few months now. And then when we were going through and looking at where this all falls on, and this thing that I was just talking about Zeus using Almathea's face on his aegis, and that's paralleled in Athena using the Gorgon's face on her aegis, I was like, oh, weird. There's still more tying these places together. There's like these multiple stars here that reference like, okay, just a apotropaic head in the sky. And then like, if that has possibly anything to do with why Rahu fits there, or and that doesn't mean that Rahu does well for Rahu there, like that's
more, give me
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
And creates, and that's why we see this like proliferation of stories, and this proliferation of like smelling everything and all this stuff.
And Rahu has to do with illusion also, it's like the illusion of materiality. If you go deeper into the like philosophy of the nodes, it's materialization. So it's like the illusion of, it's the samsara. And also, I just wanted to say we are going to have an eclipse on the Gorgon or Algol at the end of the year. We can talk about it when we get there. But
yeah, totally.
But yeah, so I don't know. There's something about madness and just like too much information that you absolutely don't need. Digging for information or information coming in, too much information, like a saturation of information. But the thing with Rahu which, you know, is the point where the eclipse happened, is that he doesn't have a stomach to digest. So there's always taking in more. There's really something about just like this, you know, and if you think just social media, it's just such a good parallel for the North Node and Gemini. There's just like, there's no yet standards for how much information is enough information. We can just like absorb so much information.
Well, it's like dogs. You know, if you have dogs, you'll notice that they tend to they'll eat or drink water or whatever just till they vomit. You know, like, and they'll
if you notice,
sometimes they'll reconsume it, sometimes they'll leave it or whatever. But
sometimes they eat their poop too.
Yeah, totally. But they don't have like it's just how they function. I was gonna say not a good, but it's good for them. It's that's just how their stomachs work, and the way they deal with it is by eating grass or whatever. But it's very much like the drawings we were getting. There's stuff everywhere. There's stuff to gnaw on. There's stuff to smell, and they'll just kind of scan the ground, eat, puke it up, like move on, sniff. But it's very much like this, you know. Then throw Rahu in there, and it's just more of this dynamic that already kind of exists in this space, you know.
Yeah, and I guess we had eclipses last year, kind of on that border. They were happening in Cancer, but it's just on the border. It's not just on the border of 0 Cancer. So, I guess another interesting thing, not so much about the place itself, but just the fact that the planet ruling this solar eclipse, Mercury, is actually also in Dog Mansion. So it just again kind of adds another signification for this place, you know. And actually this, I've been kind of pulling hair with other astrologers about this, just the fact that Mercury will be Cazimi, it will be in the heart of the sun, but actually 14 hours later after the eclipse. So you can see some astrologer interpreting this eclipse as being like, oh, Mercury's being reborn, you know, in the circle of fire of the eclipse, but it's actually combust at the time of the eclipse. So the planet ruling this eclipse is actually combust. And, you know, we don't need to go too much into that if you don't want to, but I think
I think it's cool because it's like, it's also in rulership and it's combust. It's like, it's so mercurial. It's like, it's good, it's bad, it's good and bad, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Very contradictory. And I actually was like on Facebook and I asked like all the astrologers on there, I was like, what do you guys think of this like Mercury Cazimi on the day of the eclipse, you know? And it was very polarized, like in terms of people. Some people thought it was good. I was like, oh, it's like Mercury's consulting, but he's consulting with a mad king, you know, because the king is being eclipsed.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but sometimes you have to consult with the mad king, you know. I think like it rings really, I mean, you want to like kind of tone down or not engage with like maybe if you have like a goetic practice, like it's like you're not necessarily going to like be diving in during eclipse time until we figure out the best way to do that. But maybe it's more of a remediation mode. But it does like remind of the type of work you do when you do goetic type magic, or people who are engaged with like kinds of witchcraft or kinds of shamanism, where you are kind of like tangoing with some like heavy kind of dangerous spirits sometimes, and like kind of, you know, the way in the myths too, like in the myths of Zeus and Athena wearing the aegis to go up against the Titans, you know, they're going against like the primal like forces of nature, maybe not like even like maybe like physics is more what they're talking about, you know, like the gravity and things like that. But you tango with these spirits or these entities that sometimes are kind of like a mad king, but that's the only way to go, you know. But on that note, it made me think of also how there's this, you know, the eclipse, whether you look at it tropically or lunar zodiac, there's this proliferation of information and communication, like too much communication. But if you look at where Mars is at the beginning of the month, it's in Horse Mansion, and then not until the end of the month does Mars, and I'm just looking at the night sect, like then Mars moves out of horse mansion or horse shape or whatever, and then Venus moves into horse shape as Mars moves into she goat. So there's a weird parallel there too with the stars.
A game of telephone.
Yeah, a game of telephone, but it's also like that's totally a game of telephone, but it's all like a relay. But it's also where in the Grimorium Verum, where if you lay that out, that's where you'd find Skirlin, who's the spirit who is kind of the operator at the switchboard, who brings in all the other spirits. And when you're like, well, what does that have to do with horse? And you cross-reference back, like horses don't exist as directly in that that kind of like Dionysian, Hellenistic, syncretic kind of like, Egyptian, like at Thebes or Alexandria at the time. Horses were considered something that came from elsewhere. They came from with the Indo-Europeans. They came across from Sumeria and the Babylonian direction. So they're related to other deities like Inanna or things that got like kind of so they represent this foreignness and this new cultural influence coming in as all these strangers come in.
And so also movement again.
Yeah, movement again. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was an interesting, like, rule of three, when you're like, this is all about communication, all this influx of information. And then you're like, all right, well, what's the rest of the night sect up to? Is there any other important ingresses? And there's a lot of stress on horse mansion throughout the whole month.
To specify, horse is between 25 Cancer and 8 Leo. So when we say horse place, like Mars will be in horse mansion, is between 25 Cancer and 8 Leo.
Which lunar mansion is that?
That's the 10th.
That's the 10th, and so that's Al-Jabba, the brow.
Yeah, and also the Charioteer, that's associated with the constellation where the solar eclipse happens. There's a lot of like forward motion, but it's a lot of, it's almost like if you see a chariot and whoever's driving it has like a 1,000 beasts propulsing it forward,
Yeah.
Instead of just like one direction. It's like there's a lot of movement. We're definitely not last year, we're really changing track now. And that's going to become even more obvious when we hit the full moon at the end of June, because it's going to be the first full moon on this axis, Capricorn Cancer axis, that is not an eclipse. Yeah,
totally. But it is interesting though that there's like all this reflection too, whether you look solar or lunar. Like back last year, there was the summer solstice eclipse in wolf shape, and then this year it's in dog, and that's like a really evocative section of the sky. As you get from the Egyptian perspective, you get the dog and the wolf, or the jackal and the dog, or the jackal and the wolf. So you'll see it interpreted different ways, but you get Wepwawet and then Anubis, right next to each other, as by listing like dog, wolf. And then, if you hop over to the Greek interpretation, you get like the multiple headed dog, Cerberus. But then if you look at the sky, you get like the old colloquial place of the dog stars, and which bring in the dog days of the summer. And in each of these traditions, it's like the dogs preside over the crossing of these rivers into the underworld, crossing into the underworld space, or leading through the duat or whatever. And this is where you get like the heliacal rising of Sirius, like used to be the flood of the Nile in ancient Egypt. And this dog days of summer beginning, this moving in across the gates of incarnation, and all this stuff there, so it does harken back to next year, is putting a stress on this kind of like
next year or last year.
I mean, last year, this like stress of like crossing, but it's kind of going backwards, and you're getting all this like backwards and forwards reference, how like Orga also was referred to as the goats, and it's the place of the she goat. But then like a couple shapes down is like the she goat. And then there's a lot of kind of like back and forth tension, which is perfect for for this, like all the mercurial activity.
Yeah, I mean, we're crossing the solstice gates, this is like a really important point. So there's like a lot of motion, but if we think back in the last couple episodes we did, we were talking a lot about purging and things kind of getting rid of and making space. And I feel like this particular eclipse might be a lot more like input. It might be a lot more of things incoming as opposed to outgoing, just not just because of the nature of the North Node, but just because of the nature of the time and the season and the solstitial gates.
Totally.
Crossing,
yeah, definitely incarnating.
A lot of new sort of elements coming into, but maybe an overwhelming amount.
Yeah.
Like
Wait, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what does a dog do if there's like, I think of the dog that I take care of, Sally. She's just like, if I take her on the street and she just loves garbage so much, and she's like a maniac. She just like, she moves from one garbage pile to the other and just everywhere, and she's so scared of like missing one little piece of garbage, and so it's just like this crazy mad dance, like zigzagging through the street trying to find the next piece of garbage.
Yeah, I have one of these dogs too. And then and I was thinking about that as far as remediation from the kind of perspective that we use, which use PGM and is lunar, and so possibly like Hekate as a deity of gates and of liminality in dogs, and she's also a psychopomp. She's known to she who can hold Cerberus in chains, or wild dogs are friendly to her. And if this is an eclipse of like excess dog energy, she's not, across all accounts, she's probably a good deity to call on, but she's known to make people's lives more difficult rather than easier, because it's like an initiatory goddess. But I think on a very simple level, especially if you already have like a relationship with Hekate, like offerings, a little bit of a supper, keep it really simple and mellow. And just like a couple candles and eggs, some honey at a crossroads or something, because this proliferation of optionality and alternatives and new influx of information is like the proliferation of the roads forking in front of you. It's just like almost like when you have you do a bunch of road opening work and then you have way too many options and you're like, well, now what do I do? So just kind of a little very mellow kind of offering.
Very mellow.
It's not because you're not doing magic, you're just doing remediation. You're like, hey, Hekate, this is clearly a time that's loaded with your significations. Go easy on me. Help to hold the dog in at bay, and help me to guide me down the forking roads.
Help me to chew.
Help me to chew. No, I didn't choose, not chew. But maybe help me to chew. Definitely improve my sense of smell, which is interesting.
Me to chew this life.
Yeah.
This bone that life has thrown at me.
Yeah, help me chew the bone of life. But but how like smell can be helpful in remote viewing, as like if that's the feedback, how smell also improves tracking skills. And then in the syncretized issue from Kimbanda to the shape of dog is Eshu Veludo, like Eshu of the animal hide, or the shaggy Eshu, who's a messenger of the hunter god. Sometimes called Velvet Knight or just Velvet. So like the
that
coat.
Sounds very sexy.
Yeah. So just
Velvet dogs.
The coat of a dog. Well, I have one of those who's like soft, short hair dog. But yeah. So I mean, there's something to this, like by improving your sense of smell and your ability to track and to sense that as the roads fork before you, you can be better at choosing which way is the right way to go down, how to like make sound decisions while things are overly turbulent, and making sure that there's like not beasts running around, snapping and biting and stuff. So
I love that image though of all the roads forking ahead of you. It's really good image for this
yeah
place. Especially just like, this place, considering everything else that's going on there, and Jupiter and Pisces, which is also opening a lot of new things.
Yeah, flooding. So
Yeah.
like I would like if you were gonna call upon Hecate here, I would just like I wouldn't pick any aggressive or really magic heavy invocation, just like something really simple. And then just kind of be like, here's some offerings, you know, help like just be by my side, you know, look out for me and help me with my dogs.
Yeah.
Um,
Or my horses. Bring me
or
some
my
horses.
horses. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's what happens to me. I
Yeah.
always get horses. Do you want to move to the full moon?
Yes. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
kind of the last thing to say. And it segues perfectly because this is the full moon at the it's at 3 degrees and 28 minutes of Capricorn. And so it's the end of eclipse season and it's at this the other solstitial gate. So this is at the, it's on the 24th of June. So it's just a few days after solstice. So we have the eclipse at Dog at the, right before the rivers of into the other world, and the sun crosses the gate of incarnation, and then a couple of days later we get this moon filling up in the gate of excarnation, and
Do
a
you want to talk on
reference
this a little bit, just in case some people don't know?
the incarnation excarnation.
Yeah, just like briefly.
Yeah, it's just you'll see through, well, I mean, one is like Sothis and the flooding of the Nile, and that's when that star would be the heliacal rising star, and then so there is that natural phenomenon that people might have looked at in antiquity, and be like, well, this is where it all begins and the world is born. Like when you look in the Thema Mundi and Cancer is the first sign, that's why. And then there's a collection of myths through the mysteries and through regular Greek religion, syncretic religion, of which later gets filters into Mithraism, and you see Cautes and Katapates, the torch bearers, and one holding their torch up, the other holding their torch down, and this idea of like where the Milky Way and the ecliptic crosses, being at the solstice, summer and winter solstice, and at summer solstice beings come from the heavens, from the other world into this world, and then at winter solstice they leave this world through the crossing of the celestial rivers, like the Milky Way and the ecliptic, and then the other invisible rivers that the Styx and etc., as like the underworld and the roof of the sky, or like the firmament and the underworld are like synonymous in this way. It's a circular and spherical model of reality, rather than just like stacked spheres that you get later in Neoplatonism.
So we could call, well, yeah, I call them the celestial gates.
Yeah.
And I guess this would be summer solstice is I guess the gates of men that are called, because it's the gates of incarnation. But this particular full moon happens at 3 degree Capricorn, which is really close to the gates of the gods, which is where the souls return or exit from earthly realms. So there's this kind of interesting interplay between summer solstice happening and then this full moon culminating.
Yeah, totally. And it's hard to talk about this shape without talking a little bit about the shapes before it, because this is in the Greek Magical Papyri and the Proto-Mene. This would fall on Virgin. But the thing about Virgin is it's the first of the last 7 shapes. And so before Virgin, kind of as a lead up, you get mouse, deer, dragoness, Virgin, and then torch, lightning, garland, herald swan, child, and key. And so the last 7, the 21 first shapes are animals, and the last 7 are cult objects of Hecate, associated with Hecate.
In the
so
PGM.
There's in the PGM. But then in other lists, you'll see the last 7 shapes have longer, more obscure, and more metaphysical or names, like the luckiest of the lucky, or the lucky one of this. I think that's what it is in the Pikatrix for, let's see here.
The lucky one of the slaughterers.
Yeah,
Slaughterers, it's interesting if you think that it's the gate of the gods and the where the soul exits, and there's this
totally.
like name, lucky one of the slaughterers.
And the image of it is a man with wings on his feet wearing a helmet. So Mercury.
Interesting.
So
Yeah,
there's more
well,
of this
Mercury
like
is, yeah.
connection back to the other lunation, and
What Mercury, I mean, if he's like has the psychopomp function, he would be
totally.
guiding the souls out. This particular full moon in Capricorn, which falls in Virgin, just to specify, Virgin falls between 0° Capricorn and 12° Capricorn. So that's the place we attribute to Virgin. That's going to be the first lunation here that is not an eclipse in the last 2 years. So it's going to be, I think, really different in comparison to like what was going on these axes for the last 2 years. So it's just a full moon, it's a full moon, and it's really well aspected with Jupiter. So there's really like this culmination process, maybe of, culmination process. But if we think in terms of Virgin, it's an initiation process also.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I mean the initiation being like that's why I went back that far, because you get mouse, which is probably related to Apollo, deer related to Artemis, their siblings. They both have this civic role we talked about last month, like in and out of the city, what comes from afar, and like, the perimeter of the city rather than within the city. And then Dragonus, which sometimes you'll see as multiform, but in the Pikatrix, that mansion is called the city. And so this kind of like the dynamics of in and out of the city, then the city itself, which is kind of like the monstrous, like sprawling metropolis. But that's where you go for initiation. And that's also the degree of winter solstice. So that's, it's starting to be winter. Things are starting to happen indoors, and even in pre-civilized world, like in caves, you're going underground, inside, into the labyrinth, and then these initiation sequences begin.
Yeah, there's something really sober about this place that comes through with, for me, like in the drawings and everything. There's something very sober in comparison to like Dragoness, for example, like the city.
Yeah,
when
I think
you
it's
get
like Dragoness is like. Wait, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you get to Virgin, it's like, ooh, there's just like this kind of focusing in, clarity, but or like how do you say, solemn. It's very solemn. There's something kind of like observant and preparatory.
Yeah, totally. It's totally preparatory, and I mean, and that jives with it being Capricorn, but it's in the sequence from the PGM. I think what you're kind of talking about is ritual purification and preparation and preparing the temple space. And as you go, like, it's like, well, here's the Dragoness, here's the multiform city itself, and then that butts up against the axis mundi, and then you enter the center space, and you're in the eye of the initiatory storm. And then as you go to the altar and enter initiation and enter the labyrinth of the mysteries, you clean yourself, you become pure, you return to a pure state. It's totally getting ready to go through the sequence that follows.
And just to kind of have more perspective on this place in terms of like what's been going on, like here we had a solar eclipse exactly here, well, at 4° Capricorn, just 1 degree away, in 2019, at the end of 2019. So we had a solar eclipse there, and I feel like in a lot of ways at that time there was a lot of building up to all the Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, like what was going to transpire in the last year. And now I feel like the full moon is kind of maybe illuminating this process, as opposed to like, oh, we're entering in darkness, we're not sure what awaits us, what kind of initiation. I feel like this full moon is more like illuminating this process,
Yeah, like Yeah, totally. Back what we were initiated into and what structures got built out of that initiation, and then what we're initiating ourselves into by next winter. Like, I feel like the significance of, because we always get a Capricorn full moon, and if you get it here in Virgin, I think partly the significance is because it comes in the summer, is like now with most light while you're outside and, you know, in the northern hemisphere, and the weather is nice and you have time to build, you can build your temple for the ritual activity that you're going to partake in
Yeah, and
by winter time.
there's a type of surrender and acceptance to what is, you know. That's like typical Capricorn, but even more so here with Virgin, it's like this is kind of like the higher purpose and the work, you know.
Yeah.
And that's illuminated, and it's kind of stoic in a way, but not stoic in a stern, dry Saturnian way. It's stoic in a like service oriented way, maybe, or like service to yourself, even, you know, service to yourself for the purpose of development or knowledge or something like that.
Well, yeah, it's like the lucky one of the slaughterers. So it's like there's a lot of people who want to be initiated, but not everyone's going to go through the whole process, you know?
Yeah, totally. Also, yeah, Jupiter is really supportive to this this full moon. Is like, I guess, 1 degree away sextile in Harold's Wand, which I really like. I like that place. So it's almost like, I don't know, I feel like we're better equipped now. And by the end of June, even though if you listen to the astrology forecast and like all the, you know, Saturn, Uranus square, and then Mars entering Leo, it's going to be all very tense. I think there's a lot of really fluid aspect, and there's a sort of coming to term with what transpired in the last year and a half or so. And that's the initiation, you know. It's like, okay, this is actually where we stand now, instead of being like, when are we going back to normal, or why is this happening, or what the hell is happening, you know. There's kind of this sobering acceptance of like, okay, now this is where we're moving, you know.
Yeah, totally. And I think with Jupiter up ahead in Harold's Wand, and, you know, Virgin being the beginning of this more initiatory sequence, coming after the eclipse in Dog, like this proliferate, like if we kind of just lay it out, there's like a proliferation of information and sensory information and forking pathways, and we might need to ask for help and guidance through that. Then there's the solstice, and we cross over, you know, a lot of times you can just ignore that the solstice is happening, but just like magically at that point, then we cross over the gate of incarnation. There's rebirth. Then there's this kind of like assigning yourself, you know, dedicating yourself to the further development and initiatory process. But Jupiter says, oh, here's a bunch of coherence from a future stage of your initiation that says like everything will be okay. Like as you're descending into the labyrinth, there's this like little window that shows you sort of emerging out of it, rather than it just being this dark, scary process, you know, because Garland is really difficult, but then Harold's Wand frees you from Garland. I think we talked about that last time, but
did we? Oh, I can't remember. But Saturn, which rules this full moon, is in Garland, so it's, which is, you know, it's at 12 Aquarius, so Garland place, which is a very kind of stuck thing, which is an underlying sort of narrative that we've experienced, you know, even though everything is opening up. Well, I know in the US here it is a little bit. I don't think we're done for this year yet. So
no, definitely not. There's more
promises to come, and this might be also just this sort of, like you said, initiation into the labyrinth, but very well equipped at this time, and more knowledgeable and more ready and sort of more detached too, because for like initiation like this, you have to be detached, you know.
Yeah. And then, you know, this is like the Grimoire Verum spirit here. Segal is said to make prodigies and monsters and chimeras appear, and so it kind of harkens back to the multiform and the dragoness and kind of the the mother of abominations like the echidna and such. And then the Eshu that's syncretized to Segal is Eshu Giramundo, the world turner, the world twister. So this is another one of the 22nd Lunar Mansion. When you look across to the other stuff, it's like, oh yeah, this is definitely matching up across these traditions that seem to be talking about 28 lunar places. But the Pikatrix Talisman is for binding tongues to prevent evil talk. And this made me think about like that this is sort of the anchor after a Rahu, Gemini, dog, solar eclipse, where there's this proliferation of talk and communication and thoughts and that like, so if Hekate is venerated around the eclipse, and then
you might find the entrance to the labyrinth.
yeah but Mercury's also retrograde conjunct the eclipse, and then the Cazimi is going to happen 14 hours later, and those are all good times to get like all of the above is good times to catch some messages from the underworld, whether that's from the dead.
You're talking about June 10th, right?
Yeah, June 10th. Yeah. And then, but since it's so Rahu, it's like almost like you get as much noise as signal. Oh
my God, you're so Rahu.
Yeah, you're so Rahu. But then like you can like harvest all of this stuff. Like, I would say just like venerate, remediate, and just listen, like do a little just like scrying or open listening type divination, not anything pushy, and hear what kind of like whispers come through during vision or trance or dream or what automatic writing or whatever. Collect that information, and then at this point, as this has this like narrowing effect and this grounding effect and this like kind of being able to bind evil talk, and keep fugitives safe and all these things, you might be able to like understand by this full moon, while the moon illuminates this territory, like what of that information kind of makes sense for preparing for 6 months from now, and what of it was just like randomized data, just a bunch of like psychobabble.
Yeah, because you can kind of appeal to Hekate like on this solar eclipse, or just like very lightly, don't be too pushy. But that's like one of the significators of Rahu,
Yeah.
So the tendency might be actually, that's kind of caution here. The tendency might be like, oh shit, there was 3 birds. What does that mean? Oh no, I saw like 5 keys on the floor. What does this mean?
Yeah,
and
totally.
like driving yourself crazy with that,
Yeah. Yeah, you want her to help you filter, but then this is maybe where I'd start looking for like the readout to make more sense.
Yeah.
On the full moon in Capricorn.
Yeah, I love that image. So like we have June 10th, like all the roads forking ahead, like a million roads sort of appearing ahead. And then, by the time the full moon arrives, you kind of find the entrance door to where you're heading, and kind of like take a breath. And
it's the excarnation. So all of the kind of just like it's all the kind of like random malefic spirits like can it's like the door opens and they can leave at this point. It's like, okay, like the extra stuff can leave at the gate of excarnation. And so you can kind of see what's real.
Yeah, I like that.
And also like there's oncoming light, because, Virgin probably referring to probably like a little bit back to Artemis and as like the kind of sacred virgin, and then a bit of like definitely Hestia and like the Vestal virgins who keep the flame of the altar in like religious spaces lit.
The next place is torch. So
yeah, exactly.
After Virgin, yeah.
So it's like that's where we get Vespers, like the Vestal virgins, and this association with like virgins being the ones who keep the flame going, and then the flame being what leads you further. You're able to see further into the labyrinth, and it's like the flame it's the torch that Hekate bears. So we're not quite to the torch section yet, but just knowing that like you're kind of getting set up, getting cleaning your space, cleaning yourself, purifying yourself, like getting prepared for like a longer trajectory.
Yeah, it's an interesting culmination point, like just this first lunation on the Cancer Capricorn that is not eclipse. And it's a beautiful sort of transitional season this year, just the sun moving into Cancer and trining Jupiter in Pisces, which, you know, really beautiful. And then that full moon that is just a full moon, it's not an eclipse. You know, we're on the other side of something. There's still many roads forking, but yeah. And then it's like, wait, you know, this lunation in Earth sign, and then like what you're saying before, people are like kind of like, all right, well, when are we going to go back to normal? And then realizing that's not really happening, and like there's other stuff down the road. But then we do get the upcoming, you know, in the fall, like there'll be a north node eclipse in Taurus. So there is this kind of like, okay, what's the plan? What's the pattern? What groove are we going to get into? How are we going to start like making things for real, like actually doing things that are physical? And I feel like there will be a little bit of a reflection of that here, or at least a moment possible to be reflective on how you want to prepare things. I always think it's a good time also, you know, this full moon in Virgin, to begin construction on the visionary construct of your temple for which you operate in vision, you know? Just regular stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end.
I
don't have anything left to say.
Yeah, surprisingly, the dogs were all well behaved.
I know. Well, we'll just wait until June 10th to see if they're well behaved.
Yeah. Sort of like, yeah, keep your dogs tethered.
Metaphorical ones.
Yeah, and literal. All right, well, thanks for listening. We're gonna do this every 28 days. So yeah, next month, there's some interesting stuff next month. I was kind of peeking ahead. There's like the Venus-Mars conjunction in Leo, which I was kind of excited to talk about later. All right, talk to you then.
Okay, ciao.
Thank you for listening to Liminal Light. You can find me at atavisceral.com, atavisceral.com, where I post forecasts and articles and offer astrological and divinatory services. For more discussions on the moon, go to lunarzodiac.com and sign up for our mailing list to find out about lectures, workshops, dreaming groups, events, appearances, publications, and whatever else. Now that the show is back on track, there's a bunch more guests lined up to discuss what is going on in the sublunar realm. We'll see you there.